when suddenly...
In a world plagued with devious and often dangerous crimes, it is often uncommon to see teenagers among the perpetrators. But on occasion, some teens end up committing some of the most heinous crimes known to man, and end up receiving the ultimate punishments. So, let's have a look at some of the most dangerous teens' reactions to receiving the death penalty.
Dexter Johnson, the jury is found guilty of capital murder. In accordance with the laws of the state of Texas, this court hereby assesses your punishment of death. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this is going to complete your jury service. I'm going to meet you in the jury booth.
In the early hours of Sunday, June 18, 2006, in Harris County, Texas, 5 young adults were riding in a black Nissan Sentra looking for someone to rob. They were Ashley Irvin, her brother, Lewis Irvin, Keith Ron Fields, Timothy Randall, and newly turned 18-year-old Dexter Johnson. After minutes of scanning the area, they came across a parked blue Toyota Matrix, which had 2 people sitting inside. 23-year-old Maria Aparici and her 17-year-old boyfriend, Huino. Johnson swiftly left the vehicle and approached the blue Toyota while holding a shotgun. On getting there, he stood outside the driver's door and threatened to shoot the passengers if they didn't cooperate. Little did they know that their fate had already been sealed. Following the threats by Dexter Johnson, Maria Aparici and Huino decided to comply and made their way to the back seat of the Toyota, where they were joined by Lewis Irvin, while Fields climbed into the passenger seat, which had been vacated. Johnson then started the Toyota and began driving around the block as he asked for money, while Ashley and Randall followed behind in their vehicle. Eventually, both vehicles stopped near a wooded area. Then Fields forced No out of the Toyota and held a gun to his head while Johnson up Parisi right there in the car. After Johnson finished, he and Fields marched the couple into the woods and shot each of them in the head before driving back to their apartment, as Randall and the Irvins followed behind. They even used Aparici's credit card to purchase gas for both vehicles on their way back. 2 days later, on the 20th of June 2006, Fields' mom, Felicia Williams, called the Humble Police Department to inform them about 3 suspicious vehicles which were parked in the parking lot of her apartment complex. Officers responded to the call and discovered that all 3 vehicles had been reported as stolen, including a blue Toyota Matrix. The next day, the mother of the 14-year-old girl also called the attention of the police department after she failed to return home past her curfew. When the officers arrived, the girl had returned, and on further questioning they found out that she had been with Johnson earlier that day. The police officers headed to Williams' apartment and found Johnson smoking and in possession of some marijuana. They also found a shotgun under one of the beds, which Johnson admitted to owning. As a result, Johnson was arrested for possession of marijuana, and his shotgun was also confiscated. Around this time, Aparici's father had already reported her disappearance to various police departments. When Everett Hargrave, a detective in charge of the investigation, became aware of the blue matrix recovered in Humble, the dots began to connect. No's family had also reported his disappearance, and Aparici's father reported the use of her credit cards, so the detective went on a search for more clues, and was able to access footage which showed 2 black males using the credit card at a Walmart in Humble. Johnson, who was still in custody, was called in for questioning and initially denied the allegations. However, Hargrave didn't buy the lies and instructed the Harris County District Attorney's Office to charge him with aggravated robbery. Johnson was also transferred to the Harris County Jail on the same day. On the 23rd of June, Randall was also arrested and interrogated, and he eventually ended up showing the officers where the bodies of Aparici and Nyo were. Around that time, the Irvins were also arrested and questioned. That evening, Johnson was transferred to the Houston Police Department's Homicide Division, where he was questioned and admitted to Aparici, but denied shooting the couple with his shotgun. By the time Johnson and all 4 of his accomplices had been interrogated, it was alleged that the deaths of Aparici and Nyo were part of a 25-day crime spree perpetrated by the crew, which resulted in 5 deaths. For his alleged role in the murders, Johnson was charged with 2 counts of manslaughter and sentenced to death in 2007. Johnson looked pretty disappointed on hearing the sentence as he fell deeply into his seat in confusion.
Your punishment of death. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this is going to complete your jury service. I'm going to meet you in the jury room.
following over a decade on death row. His execution was initially set for the 2nd of May 2019, but it was postponed 90 days to the 15th of August due to issues with his lawyers. However, a day before the new execution date, the Court of Appeal decided to stay the execution with a ruling that permitted Johnson to litigate his claim that he was ineligible for the death penalty due to an intellectual disability, as he had been diagnosed with schizophrenia. Today, Johnson, who is now 36, remains in custody and awaits a final verdict on his case. But this next teenager wasn't so lucky.
Shane Bargo Jr. should be sentenced to death, yes.
Michael Bargo holds his head after hearing he is sentenced to death for the second time on Tuesday.
On the night of April 17, 2011, 18-year-old Michael Shane Bargo and 4 of his friends, Amber Wright, Kyle Hooper, Charlie Ellie, and Justin Soto, schemed in the gruesome murder of 15-year-old Seth Jackson. The motive? A toxic mix of youthful recklessness, jealousy, and spite. Seth Jackson had dated Amber Wright for just over 3 months before the couple had a bitter breakup in March 2011. After the breakup, Wright became romantically involved with Michael Bargo, but continued to send text messages to Jackson. This obviously made Bargo jealous when he found out. For weeks leading up to his murder, Jackson was repeatedly threatened by Bargo, including cases at Wright's home and one at his own home, with his mother reportedly once hearing Bargo tell her son that he had a bullet with his name on it. During that same period, Ellie, who lived in a 2-bedroom home in Summerfield, Florida, had allowed some of her friends, including Bargo and Hooper, to move in with her. On the day of the murder, Bargo assembled his roommates, first informing Hooper, who had apparently lost a love interest to Jackson, that he wanted to make a plan to murder Jackson. Later that afternoon, Bargo got Wright to use text messages to lure Jackson over to Ellie's home, with the plan being to ambush him once he got into the apartment. Jackson was initially skeptical about Wright's texts, but decided to go visit anyway, despite the warnings of his close friend, William Samalot. After arriving at Ellie's home, Jackson sat down waiting to speak with Wright before Hooper, who was in one of the rooms, grabbed a wooden object, then ran into the living room, where he delivered a blow to the blindsided Jackson. Bargo, who followed closely behind, then shot at Jackson, who managed to survive the initial rain of bullets, and ran out the door. However, Jackson didn't make it very far before he was tackled by Soto and shot at by Bargo once again. The two boys then beat him up further before his almost lifeless body was carried back into the apartment and put in a bathtub. Bargo's plan was to make sure that the last face Jackson would ever see before his death would be his, and he made sure of this by delivering the final shot to Jackson's face. Bargo and Soto disposed of Jackson's lifeless body, putting it into a sleeping bag and burning it in Ellie's fire pit. The following morning, Wright's stepdad, James Havens, arrived at Ellie's home to help dispose of Jackson's remains, which he dumped at a remote water-filled rock quarry. The following day, police arrived in the neighborhood to investigate the reported disappearance of Jackson. Bargo had to stay away, and Havens tried to help by sending him to stay with the family of his girlfriend, Kristen Williams. However, despite not knowing the Williams, Bargo told basically everyone that cared to listen what he had done, with subtle twists to the story. On the 19th of April 2011, law enforcement finally arrived at the Williams home and took Bargo into custody. Even after his arrest, Bargo continued to tell on himself, informing a fellow inmate of what he had done. After the police obtained multiple search warrants, his revolver was also found in Ellie's home, with the box found in his grandmother's home. The fire pit in Ellie's home was also discovered to contain possible human remains. Jackson's remains were eventually found underwater beneath the Ocala quarry, and his DNA was strongly matched to that of the missing person they were looking for. Despite all of his prior comments linking himself to the murder, Bargo initially denied his involvement when interrogated in court, claiming that he had only participated in disposing of Jackson's body and suggesting that Hooper may have done the deed and implicating the rest of his friend group. Despite his attempts to retell the story during his trial, Bargo was eventually charged with first-degree murder with a firearm and was found guilty in August 2013 by a jury who overwhelmingly recommended that he be sentenced to death, despite family and friends testifying in his favor.
The defendant is guilty of murder of the first degree with a firearm, as charged in the indictment. So say we all, dated this 20th day of August 2015.
Bargo's attorneys appealed the verdict, claiming that there was insufficient evidence and that Bargo had been deprived of a fair trial, amongst other arguments in his case. The Florida Supreme Court eventually ordered a new sentencing hearing because the jury recommendation wasn't unanimous, being a 10-2 verdict. However, it eventually became unanimous in the resentencing on September 12, 2019, and Bargo was set to face the death penalty.
Should be sentenced to death, yes.
Michael Bargo holds his head after hearing he is sentenced to death for the second time on Tuesday.
Now 31, Bargo is currently spending his last days at the Union Correctional Institution. While Bargo is on death row for murdering a supposed foe, this next teenager suffered the same fate for literally backstabbing his own friend.
The sentence of death shall be imposed upon Austin Gregory Myers on the charge of aggravated murder.
Myers once again showed no emotion.
On the 28th of January 2014, Justin Back, an 18-year-old, was murdered in Waynesville, Warren County, Ohio, by two young men who had broken into his family home to steal a safe from the house. Those two men were Timothy Mosley and 19-year-old Austin Myers, whose evil plans ruined not just the life of an innocent boy and his family, but also theirs. Back was childhood friends with Myers when they were in middle school, as they both attended the same high school. He only graduated high school in 2013 and had plans to join the U.S. Navy. However, his dream would be cut short by a man he used to call his friend. On the day before Back's murder, Myers suggested a plan to make a quick buck to Mosley. The plan was to commit a robbery, and there were two potential targets: a substance dealer or Back's stepfather, Mark Cates. Myers was aware from his friendship with Back that Cates had a safe in his family home where he potentially kept thousands of dollars and a gun. Mosley agreed to Myers' plan to rob Cates, and both young men drove to Back's home with intentions to break into the safe. However, on getting there, they realized that Back was home, so they made a new plan, this time to murder Back, cart away with the safe, and make it seem like Back had stolen the safe and run away from home. Myers bought a 3-foot-length steel cable and fastened it into a choke wire. The next morning, Myers and Mosley purchased various chemicals and rubber gloves in anticipation of having to dispose of a body. The pair drove to Back's home that afternoon with the intention of catching him off guard with the choke wire. Oblivious to their plans, Back let them into the house, and all three men had a short discussion before they finally had their moment to strike. Mosley saw a chance to attack Back from behind with the choke wire. However, Back fought back, and in the resulting scuffle involving all three men, Mosley had to stab Back from behind before Myers continued choking him. Mosley continued to stab Back around the chest area until he was finally dead. Myers and Mosley cleaned up the kitchen where they killed Back before wrapping his body in a blanket and throwing it into the trunk of Mosley's car. The young men eventually decided to hide the body in a field and poured on some of the chemicals to speed up decomposition of the body. Myers and Mosley headed back to Back's place for one last attempt at the safe, but once they opened it, they found out there was only loose change and some random items inside. Cates came home to find his home trashed and quickly contacted the police. He also couldn't find Back despite finding his phone in the house, so he knew something was wrong. This was confirmed when the police described sighting a car which Myers had used to visit Back the previous day. Myers was eventually found, detained and questioned, but he denied having anything to do with Back's disappearance or the burglary. Mosley was also questioned and initially denied the allegations. However, at a second round of interrogations, Myers tried to implicate Mosley, who, upon hearing the false confession, decided to tell the truth. Back's body was eventually found, and it was determined that he had died of the multiple stab wounds, and both Myers and Mosley were accused of having a direct role in his murder. Myers was charged with 1 count of aggravated murder, 1 count of kidnapping, 1 count each of aggravated robbery and burglary, 1 count of theft, 1 count of tampering with evidence, 1 count of safe-cracking, and 1 count of abuse of a corpse.
That the state has proven beyond a reasonable doubt that the aggravating circumstance outweighs the mitigating factor. Therefore, the sentence of death shall be imposed upon Austin Gregory Myers on the charge of aggravated murder.
Following his sentencing hearing, Myers showed no emotion but admitted to his horrible mistake and asked for his life to be spared. He also told the jury that killing him won't fix anything and that he wouldn't feel anything. Myers' sentencing caused some media uproar, as his accomplice, Mosley, received a life sentence without parole due to a plea bargain despite being the one who pulled out a knife and made the first stab. Myers, who is now 29, is currently imprisoned at the Chillicothe Correctional Institution, while Mosley is housed at the Ross Correctional Institution. If you thought these teens deserved the death penalty, you'll be shocked by the next group. Watch these dangerous teens, who some believe also deserve death, in our next video.